Hi, Jeff. How's it going?
Very well. How are you, Alex?
Very, very good. We are gathered again for another episode of School of Thought. This is our experimental podcast that we decided to put together in the fall of the COVID year. We figured it was the right time. So yeah, today we get to talk about another one of the convictions that informs your program. But I'll talk a little bit just to introduce your program and to introduce you. Um, you are the principal of the Pacific School of Innovation and Inquiry. That's in Victoria, BC. Um, However, you are known way beyond Victoria, aren't you? Throw down a few of the countries that have been paying attention to your model.
You know that saying, like you can't be an expert in your own backyard. So, they love me in Europe. So yeah, yeah, there's some European countries, a couple parts of China, Brazil, Australia, places like that.
And
We've
you've
had
had
lots of really
people,
nice interactions.
yeah, you've had people visiting your school from how many countries, like, would you
Oh,
say?
probably 20
Wow.
countries. Yeah, I
Yeah,
would say probably about 20 countries.
very cool.
That's
And
great. It's really fun, and it's nice to
it's,
share perspectives with people.
yeah, well, and that's yeah, exactly. You hit the nail on the head. Like that's the reason behind School of Thought is, we just wanted to get some more information into people's hands so that people who are curious about and ready to make a shift toward personalized inquiry in their schools just have some more tools to do it. So hopefully these podcasts, we go kind of deep into some of the things that you've learned over the years and talk back and forth about them so that, yeah, we just wanted to make it easier for people to kind of get their heads inside the methodology.
Yep,
Yeah.
absolutely.
So I've talked a whole big bunch, but I haven't even said who I am. I'm Alex Van Tol, and I was a teacher for a long time. I taught grade 5 and 6, and then taught grade 10 and 11. I currently am not teaching. Jeff, you teach every day. Now, this is a different thing for a principal to do. Why is that an important thing for you?
Well, I think part of it is just being at this school where we are, trying to provide a model and we're inventing the model while we're providing it. I want to be a part of that so that I, sort of some street credibility and also learning, because this is a big learning, massive, massive inquiry for me and all of us here at the school. The team is important, so I'm part of that team. And I really like teaching. And even when I was a superintendent, I tried to teach as often as I could because I think it's helps you make better decisions.
Yeah, and it's important to keep your hand in the classroom. I know there's a oft repeated refrain in education that, and it must show up in the corporate space too, but what happens is you get exceptional educators who are really, really something with the children, and then because they're exceptional at what they do, they get promoted into administration, and then after long enough in admin, you really end up not being in the classroom at all, except to go around and maybe have lunch with the children. So you're really trying to do it differently at Sci.
Absolutely, yes, yeah.
Now, how
Largely,
is
largely selfish though.
largely selfish? Well,
Yeah,
I get it. I mean, it feeds you, doesn't it? Being with
yeah,
people who are like alive and ready to learn, and they're so curious, and
yeah,
yeah.
absolutely.
Now, before we dig into today's conviction, I wanted to just say that a couple things. Your school, Pacific School of Innovation and Inquiry, or PSI, or PSII for short, um, you have about how many learners this year?
About 100, just under 100. Yeah.
And that's a comfortable cap, correct, for this kind of model?
Yeah, I think you could have groups of 100 in a bigger school, but you probably need to kind of organize around about 100 people in sort of an organizational structure to make the model work properly. Um, yeah, around that number.
And why is that? Like, why wouldn't you want to have, what is it that encourages you to keep it to that smaller number?
Well, part of it is the fact that we're interdisciplinary. So we might have like 6 teachers working with one person on something, and because of that, when you get to the other end of it, where you're doing sort of final assessments, evaluation, and reporting, 6 people have to be in on it. So if you had, 90 teachers in on that, it would be absolutely unworkable. The other part is we really have to know the people we're working with really well. You have to see them a lot and build a lot of trust. So when you have 100 and then your staff, everyone gets to know everyone else really well. That's vital because a lot of what we're doing, there's a lot of risk involved on the part of the learners and the part of the teachers, and just a lot of you have to know each other well enough to know how to pass the baton here and there, things like that. So about that number of kids and staff together seems to be just about perfect.
Okay, I want you to back up. You said the R word a minute ago, and I have a feeling some educators' hair stood on end when you said risk. What do you mean there's risk involved? What?
Well, you can't learn without taking risk. You have to get outside your comfort zone, and more or less, depending on what you're trying to learn. But there's some risk attached. If you are trying to do something that you've never done before, that's risky. And if you want to actually not just show someone that you're learning what they had in mind for you to learn, but actually learn something new to you, there's risk involved. The other thing is our learners make up their own curriculum in the sense that they develop a line of inquiry, and it's often very personal. So they're showing quite a big part of themselves when they develop an inquiry, a line of inquiry, and they're sharing that part of themselves with the teacher. It's not just like we're doing, a unit on Louis Riel. It's like we're doing a unit on a thing that you're deeply passionate about, and it better work. So because you're going to get a grade on it. So there's risk in that sense as well.
All healthy risks.
Absolutely. Learn how to calculate the risk. Don't be afraid to take one. Make sure it's a healthy kind, and learn how to know you can trust people so that you can take risks with people who you can trust.
Well, and that's interesting because that actually connects directly to the conviction we're going to talk about today.
Yeah.
So just to set the stage and to remind people of what this is all about, Jeff has been operating the school for about 7 years. You're into your 8th year, and now you have run things enough to know that there are certain principles at work that uphold this personalized inquiry approach. And so we call them convictions. This tags to the work of David Baker. So you've sort of broken your model down into 20 convictions that really support it. And so today we get to talk about that connection to community beyond the school walls. So conviction number 8, and again, these aren't in any order. They're all equally important. You need them all to make it run. But you've written, connection to a community beyond the school walls is essential for adolescents. So I give you the mic. Tell me more.
Sure. I know that's a statement for sure, and you got to back that up. But I think, well, actually, it's interesting coming from what you were saying about the school being about 100, and that means there's going to be a certain number of adults that you're going to see. And in our school, that's 7 altogether, every single adult. So if you're lucky, every kind of person in the world is contained in those 7 people, but that would be pretty lucky and very unlikely. So if for no other reason than to get different perspectives from people in positions of authority or power, or just people who've had more experience than you got to get outside of the school. Schools are limited. We don't need to simulate everything inside the school. You can actually go find the real thing, just like right outside the door. And the other part of this is sort of more about the role of the adolescent in society, which is adolescents are supposed to, well, they are at a time of their life when they are developing their own, who they are. They're self-actualizing. They're figuring out what that means, and they're finding their place in the world. What part do they play in society? And quite often, especially in the last sort of 120 years, we've said school is this sort of separate thing that's, a building on a hill somewhere with a fence around it, and no one's allowed to go in, no one's allowed to go out. And if you saw somebody come out at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, they've done something terribly wrong because they should be there till 3:30, that kind of stuff. And it's sort of crazy when you think the minute they graduate, they're supposed to be upstanding members of society, completely plugged in and contributing. And
That is so true. Actually, it's surprising because I think about this all the time, but the first time I actually connected the dots on that was when I was reading your notes on this. And I was like, wow, that's totally true. Like we keep them in this box and then all of a sudden open the doors of the box and shoo them out. And we're like, okay, now you belong.
right. And then we follow that up by being appalled by them making poor social decisions. You're like, what
Yeah,
on earth? Why don't they know how to do that? It's like, well, when have they ever been allowed to do that?
right.
If you combine that also with maybe like a helicopter parent or something like that, they've had no opportunity to plug into their society. It's their society, but they don't know that because they've never seen it before.
So children at this, like, okay, what are you, when you say adolescence, what are the basic age bands you're thinking of in your mind?
Pretty broadly and vaguely, but kind of 11-ish to maybe 19, 20-ish, somewhere
Yeah,
in that neighborhood. So pretty broad, but
pretty broad. And
yeah,
like, I'm not sure, exactly where in those in that band of years there's the most neural shifting, but we do know that adolescence is a time of, I think actually following prenatal growth, adolescence is the second most um, tumultuous time inside the human brain. Like connections are being wiped, especially as children sleep. It's almost like their brain kind of turns itself inside out during adolescence, and we see that sort of reflected on the outside by their crazy sleep schedules, and we see sometimes we see crazy or erratic behavior, uh, hormone surges, mood swings, and that is a result of, sort of the tension between the prefrontal cortex not being fully developed, but also immense rewiring happening underneath in the white matter, not so much in the cortical gray matter on the top, but huge new breaking old connections, rewiring new connections in the deep white tissue of the brain. So that that's why they that's why our teenagers are so alive, and that is nature wiring them to go and look outside themselves. Now they're coming out of that egocentric stage of, where they're only really focused on themselves, and they're starting to look around, they're starting to compare their own norms and values to those of their peers, they're starting to compare their peers' values to their parents' values. Like, they are wired to now go out and engage, and yet not enough, there aren't enough instances of the educational system letting them do that.
yeah, that's so true. And that's brainstorming thing that's going on in adolescence.
Oh,
The
that's a good
pruning,
word. I
the,
like
the
that.
yeah, the pruning part of it that you talked about, like where they're growing new connections, but then they're also pruning connections that their brain is saying, I don't need those connections anymore. I'm starting to become the person I'm going to be. Um, if we haven't given them some opportunities to experience connections to society, they may be pruning things off that potentially still valuable connections. They will begin to, like later in adolescence, begin to limit um, some of what their brain does. And if they haven't incorporated some experiences beyond the school, they're limiting based on kind of a limited set of experiences. So it's not a good idea.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, and then the evolutionary biologist, if you want to get into that stuff, which is really interesting,
Mhm.
if the role of an adolescent is to basically invent themselves and kind of get away from, their parents and kind of
Yeah,
their
they're sort of like they're
home.
meant to go and take the tribe to a new area almost.
Yeah, and even from a genetic diversity point of view, they have to do that because you need to get away from your family for reasons that we now really understand well, but before was just probably just a kind of a primordial instinct, which was got to get away, not sure why. Um,
Yeah.
we know even like there's some biological evolutionary biology research about the smell testing where people are more attracted to people who have certain smells that are actually genetically diverse from themselves and things like that. So we know that drive is powerful. And again, though, when we say, no, reel in the adolescents and keep them real close, and they have this drive to not be close,
Mhm.
that's when we start to see some crazy stuff, some, rebellion and feeling trapped and all that, because it is absolutely not natural to contain an adolescent life that way.
So, okay, I'm just having a brainwave at the moment. I'm just thinking, we've had a lot of conversations in the last few years about youngsters and their engagement in the digital space. But we've also seen some research that's a little bit surprising, and I don't know where I read it, so I'm not citing anything directly, but there has been a decrease in violent crime roundabout since the iPhone hit the market. And I'm just thinking my way through this now. Part of one of the gifts of the web is that it allows children to get away without actually needing to have the physical representation of getting away.
Yeah.
But that has to be paired with, has to be echoed and mirrored by opportunities in the real world. But at least they're getting away digitally.
Absolutely, and that could be the way you connect with community. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing even really different. And here we are doing this podcast in two different buildings. It works really, really well. We're connecting, and kids can do that too. I think you're right. I think it's good to not limit yourself to only one way to connect with a community. But man, the digital age has sure made that more possible for people who would normally be really isolated based on where they live, or all kinds of other factors.
So now, in your notes here, when you were writing down some supporting information for this conviction about the connection to the community being important, you were writing about how schools typically schools do everything they can to keep adolescents away from the community, except for very controlled and artificial excursions or guest speakers. Most schools do not allow adolescents to connect with the community. I agree with you. And you're using the word allow deliberately.
Yes.
So, tell me more about that. Why are we not enabling reality with our learners in the mainstream system?
I think there's lots of reasons. I mean, I don't think anybody got up in the morning and kind of said, let's limit the experience of our adolescence, shall we? I think what probably happened is a bunch of things. One, we became a very litigious society, and if somebody went out and was in some situation that had an unmitigated risk of some kind, all of a sudden everyone's being sued for liable and negligence and da 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 da. So that's part of it. Schools are expected to keep kids safe, quote unquote, and so the kind of safety we've opted for is the kind that's like a little bit more the bubble wrap kind than the long-term emotional safety of a human, which requires them to interact with their community. It's like short-term versus long-term safety, small versus big safety. So I think I see a lot of people being kept safe, but you're actually endangering those people because at some point they're going to have to interact with the world. I think it's kind of incumbent upon us to help people learn how to do that. In another podcast, we talked about scaffolding. You don't just kick people out of the nest and say, go out into the world, good luck, I hope everything works out for you. We have to do some work to make sure it is safe and do it in a gradual way. But I mean, I was struck when I worked in the Gulf Islands as a superintendent. There was something extraordinary about the Gulf Islands, which is they don't tend to stratify their community by age very much. So people get together at all different ages for all different reasons. This is sort of the way the community works on most of the islands. What I found is that there, if an adult came into a room or a building and there were adolescents in there, they all say hi to each other and they talk to each other and engage. And then I noticed in some cities, and Vancouver is one of them, for example, Toronto is another one, where an adult would come in a room with adolescents and the adolescents stop talking and they look at the floor. It's like they don't know that they're supposed to or allowed to or whatever. It's like, that's not their world. And I thought, what is the difference? And the difference is in the Gulf Islands, those kids are an integral part of the community all the time, every day. And in a lot of urban centers, they're not. They're kept separate from it. They're contained.
It's true, and I actually find that in urban environments, sometimes, children will band together and hang around in packs, all sort of only integrating with themselves and with each other. And that's alarming for adults. And so adults will actually go out of their way to get out of the way of these youngsters when,
Yep.
really there's it shouldn't be that way. We should be free and fluid with each other, and children shouldn't be worried about being judged or scolded, and adults certainly shouldn't be worried about their well-being with a bunch of youngins around.
Not at all. It's actually funny. I have a lot of friends who are not teachers, and if we're walking somewhere at night and we come by a pack of wild adolescents on the street, their inclination is like, let's cross the road, let's be on, and mine is like, let's find out what they're doing, and
Let's go
so,
and talk to them.
but I usually say hi, and hey, how's everybody? Oh, great, and usually have like a little conversation on the way, but I don't know them. But I'm just so used to being around teenagers all the time that I'm just kind of curious about what they're up to, and I'm not intimidated or worried about it. But you're right; it goes both ways. If adolescents are kind of intimidated by society, and the adult society is intimidated by adolescents, like what the heck are we doing? This seems like a really weird thing, and the way to overcome intimidation is to introduce the two groups to each other. Like, let's make this fit together.
Yeah.
And there's no reason why not, and adolescents are ready to do it. And when you start to see them experience that feeling of belonging to their larger society, they do start to say hi to people. They look people in the eye. They don't just turn off. They actually, they respond like a human being you would normally respond to another human being, as opposed to feeling like there's some kind of a stratification or caste system or something like that. It's very weird, actually, to me.
Well, and I hadn't thought to point this out, but one of the differences between your school and other schools is that learners at at your school, will refer to you and your teachers by name.
Yeah.
That's really like, both of my boys went to a Montessori school, and so they were able to use first names as well, preceded by a prefix, Ms. or Mr.
Yeah.
or whatever.
Yeah.
But I remember when I was teaching in the independent system, I wanted my students to call me Alex, but I knew that doing that would set me at odds with other teachers who, some really like the title of like Mrs. Van Tall, and some didn't really care, but it just wasn't done. That
Yeah.
they were able to refer to me as by my first name, but even that is such a small thing, but it is a way of welcoming children to recognize that we're humans too. We're just a little farther down the path than you are.
That's all it is. It's funny that you mentioned that, because people ask us about that, like, how did you develop that policy or whatever? We didn't do anything. We didn't have a single conversation about that. We never had a conversation about that for 30 seconds. It just happened. And part of it is the other way around, which is because we are introducing kids to the community. And when we introduce them to, somebody named Dave, we say, hi, Dave. And they say, hi, Jeff. I don't call them Mr. So-and-so, and they don't call me Mr. So-and-so. And so the kids, it's modeling. And so they see, oh, that's how you interact with people? Okay. And we bring them into the fold fully. So it's not like, they're being tolerated by these adults. It's like, no, you're in this conversation. This is your conversation too. Yeah. We're calling each other by first name, so they start calling each other by all of us by first name. It was pretty accidental. And one time, I shouldn't say we never had a conversation. One time, a couple of years ago, I actually asked the teachers, like, are you okay with this? Like, I never even, like, it just kind of happened, but it was just totally accidental. Yeah. And everybody's like, yeah, it's great. And they've all been from different places where that maybe wouldn't have been so, that wouldn't have been so great, or it would have put you at odds with your colleagues. Yeah. And here it's just like, seems to work. It's like, okay, but I agree, it has a function for sure.
And I think, like some people might make the argument that, well, it's a sign of respect. I
guess.
But I think that is I will stand out on a limb and I'll say, I think that's totally outdated. Like, we all should be striving to be respectful of one another as humans and as beings. And I don't think age should automatically command greater respect. And I think probably a great proportion of the learners who choose your school also have difficulty just handing someone respect just because they're older and just because they're standing at the front of the room. Like, I know my son, my oldest boy, goes to your school, and when he was in the mainstream system, he was one of those children who, if he got wind of the fact that you were full of hot air, he was not going to be like, oh, I'm going to sit and listen to you quietly. He would have been the child who's like, what? Like, can you prove this to me that I should be listening to you? Because you
Yeah,
sound like you're a bag of hot air.
yeah.
So it's not just age, right? It's
Not
not
at
just,
all. Not at all. And then that person who you don't respect, you call them Mr. Hopkins. Now, do you respect them?
yeah,
No. Now
no,
they're Mr. Hot Air. Like it doesn't make any difference. I
yeah,
do remember the very first time I was a vice principal in a large school. It was in the Soup School District here in Langford and at Belmont School. And one weekend we came in the Monday and someone had vandalized the school. It broke a bunch of windows and spray painted a bunch of stuff on the back wall. And it was like, oh, it's kind of awful the first time you sort of encounter something like that. Um, and of course, I was vice principal, so the spray paint had involved me, and so it had some things on the wall about me. I was like, oh, lovely. So I was talking with the superintendent about it, and I was like, oh, this is terrible. And he goes, well, you know what? He goes, if you think about it, they put some really rude things, but then following the rude stuff, it says Mr. Hopkins, so they must respect you.
of
Which I
course,
thought
that's what it means.
it was pretty funny.
Oh.
Yeah.
Well, okay, so I wanted to, you gave just an example from your prior career as VP at Belmont, but I wanted to ask you for some examples of how your current learners are, how do they filter out into the community? How do they make that a broader part of their educational experience at SCI?
Lots of different ways. So sometimes, and other schools do this too, sometimes it's very much like a work function of work experience where they're trying to get experience somewhere. We hook them up with somewhere and we monitor the workplace and they go practice something or try something out. But sometimes it's a project where where a community organization or individual will come to us and say, I'd love to involve the school in this, what do you think? And we work with them. So an example, just right now, we have a learner she's very interested in making a rain and wind piano, is what she was calling it.
Hmm.
And what she meant by that is something that was a piece of public art that sits outside, and when it rains or it's windy, it does something and makes music. And she thought it rains all the time and it's windy all the time in Victoria, so there's one or the other. So we should, we're right by the ocean, so we should be able to make one or the other happen all the time.
Cool.
So I'm like, okay, great, that's interesting. Now, okay, already beyond my expertise, so let's go find somebody. So there's a company here in town called Limbic Media. They're wonderful. They do incredible things with light and sound and electronic sensing of sound, converting it into light and all sorts of things. So we set up a meeting and went and talked to their salesperson because that's the person who you normally talk to set up a project. And he connected us with an engineer right away. And now that through the conversation we had with the salesperson and the engineer, they found out that this learner, she's a really good photographer. So she's now taking photographs for Limbic Media for projects that they've done that they've been dying to find somebody to take pictures for them. And they looked at her pictures and went, "You're great." So she's their photographer, and
Awesome.
and they're helping her plan the engineering side of this design thing that she really is coming from an art perspective, and they're adding the engineering perspective. So we've got, a salesperson, an artist, an engineer, another artist, and this young person who's an artist and a photographer with this idea. Pretty soon that's going to involve some other kids because we're going to have to bring some other people on board to get the work done. So there'll probably be 4 or 5 kids working with 3 or 4 people in this art/engineering company, and we'll probably work with them for 5 or 6 months. We're also going to have to do a little bit of grant writing, so we'll be working with the city, and we're going to have to talk. We're looking at Chinatowns. We're going to talk to the Chinese Benevolent Society about could we put this somewhere in Chinatown. We want to add something interesting to the community. So these are going to be real interactions with adults in the community, not they came in and talked about what it's like to be an investment broker for an hour in my math class or something, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with that. We just want to also have other kinds of experiences as well.
So okay, I want to go back to that risk piece, that R word.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
piece, like what you just explained would
Yeah.
curl some administrators' hair, right? Like
Talk about it.
I am envisioning, this child off in the community on her own.
Yep.
Did you scaffold? Did you help her make that first intro? So I've
Yes.
got 2 questions as usual. How does the scaffolding work with these kinds of things? Because shy children sometimes need a bit of support. And then, yeah, what do you do on the risk piece? What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, it is, scaffolding is a big part of it. So one advantage I have is we've worked with this company a couple of times before, but I haven't talked to them for a little while, so a couple of years. So it was a cold call. Hi, it's Jeff. We have this person who wants to do this thing, and you guys came to mind, and would you mind meeting with us? So I did the cold call, and for the learner, because there's no way she would do that, and that's asking a lot of anybody. We do them all the time here. Like, that's actually a weird thing about being a teacher at the school is you're constantly calling people that you never have met, and you're
Yeah.
trying to establish a relationship. It's the weirdest thing.
Yeah.
So we have to get over that. And then, so we did that. This one was a little easier for me because I have done it before. But then I went with her to meet with a couple of people on the team. We toured their site to see kind of what their company is and what they do. And then we sat and met, and she did a pitch, and I had helped her a little bit with like how you might want to organize the pitch, but didn't have to do much. She didn't need much scaffolding on that front, but I was ready if she did. She did a beautiful pitch. They got excited, and you could just tell, like, our 15-minute meeting became an hour meeting. So you knew they were really excited. And they told her all kinds of things about the company that I'm like, why are you, like, I can't believe you're telling her this, like, pretty, intimate stuff about their company, which was great. So they trusted her.
That's cool.
And then they invited her right in, and so then, because I know them already, I've kind of done the scouting to make sure it's a safe place for a person to be. I trust them. We contact the parent and say, this is what's going on. How do you feel? Informed consent kind of stuff. And they're like, great, this is exciting. She came home and was just like flying. So, really, really excited about it. And I can, vote for the people and all that.
Is that part of the introduction / like the liftoff process, is to make sure that the family is also in the know of what the learner is doing with their project?
Yeah, if it's going to be something that's unsupervised, like where we're not going to be with them by their side, we want to make sure the family knows, because we're, under the law, we are their parent when they're not with their parent. So we want to make sure that it's okay with all the parents involved, that they're, working, doing something that's for school, but not in the school.
Right.
And no one ever says no, because we've done our homework already. So we've done the work to make sure it is a safe situation, because we would never put somebody in an unsafe situation. So we scout it out to the degree that we need to, and we are involved as long as we need to be. And sometimes that's always. So sometimes that'll be, I will always be with this person when they meet with this place, just because I can't guarantee that it will be safe necessarily.
Right.
We had a kid who was working we were serving lunches at our place here in Victoria, which is a homeless shelter, plus a bunch of services for people who are experiencing homelessness.
Yeah, it's a drop-in center.
Yeah, and so we would serve lunch there every couple of weeks, and we would always go there with the kids, because you just never knew what was going to happen. It's a bit of an unpredictable place.
Yeah.
Can't guarantee anyone's safety even by us being there, but we just wanted to make sure we were a little closer than a little farther away. So, but what an incredible experience. One of the kids had a job downtown working at a drugstore, Shoppers Drug Mart here in town. And they said these kind of people off the street would come in, and they're always a little intimidated, and their shifts would sometimes end at night, and they would go outside and they'd have to walk past people. They weren't really sure what was going on. And then all of a sudden they knew them all from lunch. And so they'd come out and they'd say, oh, hey, hi, how are you? And they, street people would wave because they recognized them, and would just, say, hi, how are you doing? And, when are you going to come in for lunch again? He's, oh, I'm going to be there next week. Great. See you then. Right. So all of a sudden the community became like a smaller, safer place.
Yeah, where people actually know each other, and that just breaks down fear, right? And earlier in this chat, you had said the word belonging.
Yeah.
And I think that's huge. But, in that particular instance, it goes both ways, right? The child belongs to the child's community, and isn't of the mind of, running through the streets, ignoring the other humans around. And the humans around, who are typically ignored or avoided, suddenly have, someone remembers my face, someone remembers my presence, and that all of these tiny touch points really do actually matter in creating that sense of community. So that's a pretty cool story.
Yeah, they really matter. It's super important. We also know, like, psychologically and sociologically, when really bad things happen, violent kinds of things to groups of people, the one common denominator is always a feeling of on not belonging. So the feeling of being outside of the community or the society. And
Right.
always, like, it's the one constant factor.
I did
So
not know that. Okay.
yeah, it's really interesting if you look at sort of like awful like mass shootings and all that kind of stuff. The FBI has done an incredible amount of work on this in the States, and they have a paper on kind of what are the common factors. And number one is an outside orientation. And they said it's very, very hard to do harm to people in a society to which you feel that you belong.
Long.
It's a lot easier if you don't. So why not create a sense of belonging? Like, that seems like a really good idea. Even our discipline system is based on that, but that's another conversation for another time. But restorative practices are definitely part of that as well, which is helping people figure out how to belong as opposed to pushing people off to the side and putting a bad sign on them.
Well, and I know this conversation is specifically meant to focus on the learners and how, how learners can experience greater learning and growth by connecting with their community. But I just want to throw in a parenting note here about belonging. Um, and I think it's relevant because it sort of tags back to that respect piece. A lot of parents and teachers who are parents, uh, anybody who's a parent, kind of expect that respect because they are the parent. And when that respect is not forthcoming, especially in adolescence, as children are flexing their muscles and stretching their wings and doing all kinds of weird stuff, I think a lot of parents become threatened and feel disrespected, and then try to clamp down, or in some cases that looks like over managing their children's life, like helicoptering, or sometimes it means over disciplining the child or restricting their freedom, which usually backfires.
Mhm.
um, but none of that comes from a place of ensuring that the child knows that she or he or they belong, right?
Sure. That's
And
right.
that, I'm not surprised. I'm surprised to learn, but I'm not surprised when I think it through, that this is the commonality with like major violent crimes, is this feeling of rejection, this
Mhm.
feeling of I'm not good enough and I'm not accepted.
Yep.
So yeah, that sense of belonging, which is enhanced by children's connection to the community, is super good for their development.
Absolutely, it is, and they feel better. Like they get a little, chuffed. I love that word, but they get a little chuffed when they know, I know someone, I know this person in the community. They're not my parent, they're not my teacher, they're
Yeah.
not my age. I know this person. I have this working relationship with this person over there, or these people, and it makes them feel different about themselves. It's neat to watch.
So, okay, we talked a little bit about the liability piece. Now, you did earlier, you did mention this, we have this complaint about children who have recently graduated high school, and they know very little about how to make their way in the community.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, and your point here is, rather than waiting until they're adults to create real connections of their own, why not do so in adolescence when they're physiologically, neurologically, and evolutionarily predisposed to doing so? So this is the time to open up.
This is it. They're ready. And this is, this is the thing we're not very good at, I think, as humans. We like things to be like on and off, black and white,
Mm.
but this is a gradual process. So it's like you begin to do this process when they're a young adolescent. It's not a switch that's flicked and you go out in the community, you go. It's a gradual process. So the idea is over time, they get more and more and more independence and exposure to the community until they are in the community all the time, because they are going to be as soon as they, I just think it's always hilarious. Like they're not allowed to do anything. And then one day they walk across the stage and, the tassel goes from this side to this side. And now, okay, you're on your own. Good luck. Everything should be fine now. Um, I don't know why it would be, because we've never let you do a single thing, but now fill your boots.
And I think, from if I think back to my own experience in high school, it was very much like that. We had agencies in grade 11 where we worked with some social service agencies, but I wasn't allowed to work. I wasn't allowed to have paid employment outside my home. I did go to camp in the summer, so I certainly had peer interaction and a little bit of adult interaction, but like in university, I did have a job, but I really was not comfortable approaching other adults for anything. I
Yeah.
was shy. I had this story, and actually, the best thing that's worked me through it is journalism, because, like you were saying earlier, you got to get on the phone and ask people, like, basically, hey, do you want to talk to me about something that you have no idea who I am, but we're going to have a relationship now? But I didn't have any tools for talking to professors, or that advice of when you have a resume, you want to go in and you want to ask to talk to the manager. I couldn't do that because I had no skills, and I had so much fear about not belonging and about not being good enough and all those things. So it was a total disservice to me.
Yeah.
Like, and now I tell my children and any child who comes in speaking radius about the importance of relationships, because that is it, man. That is the beginning and the end of your success as an adult, is how well do you form nourishing relationships that will carry you forward.
Absolutely. It's funny, you reminded me of something else when you were talking about working, because the other thing about this is some adolescents have formed great relationships in their community, but in no way does it have any relationship to school. So
Mhm.
sometimes when they come to school, they think school is completely irrelevant to their life because they've
Yeah.
got a life and then they got school, and they're two
Right.
different things they don't meet.
Yeah.
So sometimes it's the other way around, which is showing them your learning and your formal learning at school can be just as much a part of your life in the community as your life in the community is.
Yeah.
Because I think for some kids, it's just kind of like, well, I already kind of got a sense of what the world is. I'm in it all the time, except for the 6 hours when I'm here doing this weird simulated version of the world that doesn't really look very much like the actual world that I'm actually a part of
Yeah.
out there. So we like to kind of, knit those two together a little bit more because it's makes them feel good. The other thing is when you get an adult who gets really excited about something that someone is learning here, and they go, oh, that's a really interesting perspective, I've never thought of that before. They realize not only are they connected to the community, but they can contribute to the community. We just
Yeah.
had someone today who has this, she's been studying the evolution of the English language, and she wants to try to use that information to make a kind of a quantitative projection of what English is going to look like in about 1500 years.
Oh,
um,
wow.
and so she's just like, how do I, how am I going to do that? And she's kind of got some ideas, but she wants to bounce it off somebody. So we found, cold call linguistics professor at the University of Victoria, contacted her and said, here's what this person's doing. Would you be interested in talking with her? That sounds fascinating. She says, that's the most interesting project I've heard of in years. And so she's really excited about talking with this person who's 15, to see what on earth they're thinking of. And this person works using artificial intelligence to kind of map the evolution of languages. So they're going to be able to help her, but they're going to probably do something that they weren't already thinking of doing because this 15-year-old hadn't come along yet.
Right. And yeah, that just points up the idea that sometimes we think the benefit is all in one direction, right? It's always the adult wearing that specialist hat or subject matter expert hat, purveying information to the child. But yeah, like, boy, are they ever good teachers too.
Absolutely. It's
Huh.
too late. Yeah.
What did we miss in talking about the importance of connecting youth to their communities?
I don't know. We kind of I think we might have covered it. I think we've sort of got it all. Just that that risk is a big thing. We kept use the word risk like 100 times. So just I think be prepared to know that you are going to be taking a calculated risk. You have to be willing to take it, but you have to mitigate it, and you just have to make sure that everyone's fully informed about what the risk is that they're going to be taking. It's very important, and make sure people know along the way that if something doesn't feel right, they need to be able to talk to the school about the fact that something doesn't feel right. So nothing goes sideways. You want to make sure that everything is safe, because we do need to keep people safe, and that's the scaffolding part, which is not just the
Yeah.
kick you out of the nest and I hope you've learned to fly. There's a little bit more support than that.
Well, and this actually, by giving them more of the reins at this age, and like you say, scaffolding it, going with them to the first one or two meetings with a new group or a new mentor or whatever, that gives them, that equips them even better for when they're 18, 19, 20, and really are taking chances on their own without any parent or adult nearby. So this is even more essential, right? It's like mitigating risk down the road in a way better way, even though it means opening the door to small r risk now.
Absolutely. That's so true. Yes.
There's a place for common sense in all of it.
Yeah, heaven forbid, eh?
Yeah, what the heck? Jeffrey Hopkins, always good to talk with you. Let's do it again next week for conviction number 9.
Sounds great. Thanks. That was a really nice conversation.
And if people want more, they can check out the website, www.learningstorm.org. Lots of tools and toys on there, and surely more to come in the future. And yeah, stick around for the next podcast because we'll be back.
We'll be back.
Thanks, Jeff.
Thanks, Alex. See ya.